left, right.
All right, welcome back to SipTalk. Tonight's episode, while very controversial, also a very interesting topic when you get down to the history of abortion law. Right now, surveys are showing that roughly 70% of Americans are in favor of keeping abortion law as it is. And the ones that want abortion law repealed, basically making abortion illegal in the United States, are mostly the conservative religious. But the Constitution does not bow to religion. So what's really happening now actually has very little to do with religion and more to do with Constitution law. So we really dig into this pretty deep. I beg you to listen through the whole podcast. We don't really come up with a conclusion. And this, I think, content-wise, may be one of the best episodes we've done so far. But listen on, let me know what you think. Let me know what your opinions are on abortion law in the comments, and I'll see you guys on the other end. This is Sip Talk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Of course, let's go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. We are live. Welcome to Sip Talk, episode 184. My name is Justin DiGiulio, out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Bosnator Boswell, out of Charleston, South Carolina. James is a philosopher, an accountant, a referee, and a bartender. Very exciting mix of professions. Most exciting of all, of course, being an accountant. However, here today, we are not talking about accounting. We're not talking about bartending, while we may have a couple of drinks. And we are, what's the other one? We're not talking about refereeing? Yeah, we're definitely not talking about refereeing, although we might in certain instances, depending on how aggressive we get. But we're talking a bit of philosophy, and we are talking law. Today, we are talking about repealing Roe versus Wade. James, we're ringing over here. All right, we got a lot to talk about. Let's put ourselves on vibrate here. Let's not let that be an interruption. And I thought I was on Do Not Disturb across the board. Apparently not. We're talking about abortion laws. We're gonna talk a little bit about the history of the abortion laws, and then we want to get into where we are today and what's happening in the country today. James, how's it hanging down there in sunny South Carolina?
Oh, it's certainly sunny. We need some rain, man.
You need rain?
Yeah.
Is there a forest fire warning?
No. But it's just, dude, my yard is so dry.
Need some water in the yard. Speaking of hydration, what are you drinking down there?
Sierra Nevada, wild little thing. I think I got like 3 or 4 left.
Nice. Now those are pretty punchy beers. What's the alcohol content in that?
It's got to be low. It's got to be like 5% or less. It's got a lot of flavor to it, but it's light.
Oh, I always thought the Sierra Nevada was a heavier one, but maybe that's
you're
just
thinking
not
about
IPA.
So this is 5.5, but
right, not bad.
But no, you're thinking about like the Sierra Nevada like pale ale or like some of their IPAs or stuff. This is a completely different style of brew.
Got you. Well, I got a little Glenlivet. We'll enjoy that during the podcast.
Still it over ice?
No ice, actually. Just a giant pour right here.
The Australian nice.
Nice. I drank a little bit last night, actually, while I was preparing for this podcast. I went into a kind of bad place because I don't know if you're familiar with the TV series. I think it's on Netflix. It's called The Handmaid's Tale. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I feel like we're headed that way.
So have you watched it? Because I haven't really watched it.
No, I have not watched it. I'm just aware of the premise.
Yeah, so I'm not much of a series guy. It's just too much to get involved with. I can never watch all the episodes in the series, so I just feel like I'm missing out. So I don't even try. But it's about this dystopian future where kind of women are seen as property, and women are regulated by the government. Women lose their rights, and we're talking about abortion laws.
And women really just exist to produce children.
Well, when we're talking about abortion rights and we're talking about eliminating rights to abortion, we are talking about women's rights predominantly. However, this afternoon I heard it described as an abortion is really a 3-part decision one in the woman, one in the man, and one in the unborn child. So they that perspective on
Who
abortion.
said that?
It was damn, it was on what's that, Oliver, last night, today, or last week tonight, something like that.
Oh, John
He was
Oliver?
Oliver didn't say it, but he was quoting somebody, and
Yeah. He was quoting probably somebody conservative.
I'm sure he was quoting someone conservative, and that was just I'd never heard that perspective.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to make that argument, then you could make the argument that every decision I make is an 8 billion part decision because what I do will ultimately affect everybody on the globe in some way.
You're stretching it, but
No,
again,
well, I'm stretching it,
this
but
is
the
where
thing
it
is,
comes.
like,
But this is where it comes to our Supreme Court to discuss these things and figure out what's right for what's constitutional and what's appropriate for the American citizens. So I want to
say
start
hi to Shiharaba.
I want to start back in the 1960s. However, something I thought about getting into this is how we are trending right now in the U.S. when it comes to laws on the liberal end and on the right wing end. The liberals, in my opinion, are making these crazy, crazy laws, and the right wing is also making just as crazy laws, especially when it comes to abortion rights.
I don't think
Imagine,
it's not an equivalency though.
but my point is the laws that are being made. And the thing about laws is every day we create new laws, but we don't really repeal laws, right? Sometimes we update laws, but we don't really repeal laws. So it's a tough way to think about it. But like, imagine you go to the beach one year and you see the sign on the beach. There's a bunch of laws in that sign. The next year, a bunch of rules of the beach on the sign. Next year you go and maybe something happened the summer before, so they have a couple more rules added. There's no glass, no alcohol. There's no smoking. There's no roughhousing. And then the year after that, they add a couple more rules because some things happen. But that sign on the beach is never shrinking, right? The sign is never shrinking. Some of them might be clarified, but
Yeah, I get it.
the sign will, okay. All right. So, but I heard somebody make this similarity call, and they said, imagine if you went into a coma in the height of the Cold War, right, where this communist state Russia was at odds with the U.S. If you woke up today, you might think that there's so much communist influence and socialist influence over the U.S. that somehow we lost the Cold War or something happened. You wouldn't think that necessarily we beat communism and we beat socialism.
On what grounds are they making that claim? Because I don't see it.
On the grounds that there are so many laws that are encroaching on individual freedoms. That's kind of why I'm
think
saying
they're completely wrong.
We have these laws coming from the left and these laws coming from the right that the majority of people don't like.
I think we're actually more permissive as a society today than we were 60 years ago.
Let's start with Roe versus Wade. What's the percentage of Americans that are for keeping it in place?
Somewhere between 65 and 70, I believe.
So which is a very large percentage of the population, much higher than any of the recent presidents have been elected by.
By a lot.
We have a majority of people that want to keep Roe versus Wade in place, yet we have a Supreme Court that is much more right wing and wants to repeal it. And
so I'm seeing between 61 and 65%. The question straightforward: should the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade? And overturn is about 27 to 31%. 63 to 65% say let it stand, and then you've got between 6 and 10% saying unsure. So,
okay, well, look,
depending on how you measure it, that's anywhere between 65 to 73% support.
Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit and let's talk about how we got to where we are today, what Roe versus Wade is, and let's start with how we got there. So, are you familiar with Griswold versus Connecticut?
Griswold.
1965. Yeah, versus Connecticut in 1965.
Yeah, that was the state of Connecticut made it that married couples could not purchase contraception. Like contraception was effectively banned in the state.
Okay, and that's like any form of birth control or even condoms. So you wouldn't be allowed to buy condoms in the state of Connecticut. And
Yeah, that's wild. Think about that.
I know. Well, the Catholic Church was against condoms up until I think maybe the last 5 years, or maybe less than 10 years.
Are you sure they're not still against them?
No, I'm pretty sure they're okay with condoms now. But let's see. Let me just.
So to your point about communism and winning and all that, 60 years ago, like there were states that you couldn't buy condoms. So don't tell me that like we're more restrictive as a society now than we were 60 years ago.
I
Like
feel like
you're
we're heading
cherry
that way.
picking your data to make your to make your conclusions. And I'm not saying you. I'm saying the author of that statement.
Well, but I mean, back then we didn't have seatbelt laws. We didn't have helmet laws. There was considerably fewer laws. Is my point, and we're. And again, they
Right, but
kind
the
of
overall
overruled this.
pattern of behavior that you were actually restricted from is less today than it was back then. And like also our quality of life compared to 60 years ago is demonstrably better.
Okay,
So-
so let's. I just want to talk real quick about Griswold. In Griswold, the Supreme Court found the right to privacy derived from the penumbras of other explicitly stated constitutional protections. Penumbras are basically how it's defined by Merriam-Webster, a body of rights held to be guaranteed by implication of a civil constitution. So it's not explicitly stated, but they're saying it's kind of like shadowed. It's in the shadows that that's the case. So let's see. Derived from the penumbrums of other explicitly stated constitutional protections. The court used the personal protections expressly stated in the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments that found there was implied right to privacy in the Constitution. So really, it comes down to a right of privacy. And they also mentioned about the 14th Amendment.
So the 14th Amendment is a really important one because it basically makes it so that anything that's in the federal Constitution automatically applies to the states. That came around after the Civil War because the South was just like, well, it's in the federal Constitution, but we can do whatever we want as states. And the 14th Amendment said, well, no, not anymore. But it also says, and this is really important, I want to get, because we'll get back to this. It says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. I'll come back to that.
Okay, so the statement, the ruling statement by Justice Harlan was, I consider that this Connecticut legislation, as construed to apply to these appellants, violates the 14th Amendment. I believe that the statute making it a criminal offense for married couples to use contraception is an intolerable and unjustifiable invasion of privacy under the conduct of the most intimate concerns in individual's personal life. So they're saying in somebody's personal life, they should be able to make these freedom of choices within their personal life. So let's fast forward a little bit. We have this woman, Roe, who her name is not actually Roe, it's Norma McCovey. She sues Texas because abortion was banned in Texas at the time. Texas won, and they appealed in federal court. During the appeal process, let's see. Are you following my sheet, or you don't even have that in front of you?
No, I just know these things.
Okay.
Keep going.
Under Nixon, Judge Rehnquist and Judge Powell are sworn in 1972. Now, prior to the hearing of Roe versus Wade, we had Rehnquist and Powell sworn in, and then we had Einstadt versus Baird. And that argues basically the same thing that Griswold argued, except for unmarried couples. Because Griswold only ruled that married couples had this protection of rights.
Yeah, and that was a pretty easy case because they could just follow their precedent and be like, why does it matter if you're married?
Exactly. So unmarried people have the same right to privacy under the amendments, basically. Under the penumbras of the amendments. So 1973, Supreme Court ruled that the Texas law was going to be struck down, Roe versus Wade. Roe wins. basically saying that women have the right to an abortion. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive a person of the life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, as you said, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. So that means unmarried couples as well. Let's see.
Right, and so really, when this court was trying to decide this case, what they struggled with the most was just coming up with a set of rules that could be fair to apply, and that's where they kind of settled on the 3 trimesters arrangement, where in the first trimester you couldn't restrict it at all. In the second trimester, you could restrict it based on like the health of the mother, and then in the third trimester, it could only be used if the mother's life were in danger, and that would be something like an ectopic pregnancy, or like if the fetus dies in like the third trimester, and like it's required, like surgery is required to get it out because otherwise it'll kill the mother. Those kinds of things where it has to be a medical event. It can't just be by choice. And so that was most of what the hand wringing within the Supreme Court was about, was coming up with a fair standard to apply. And ever since that day, evangelicals have been fighting against this and trying to chip away at the protections afforded by Roe, and they appear to be on the cusp of complete victory, really. And the problem, if you have read the actual draft opinion, the problem is not just saying like, all right, we're going to allow more restrictions. This is throwing Roe v. Wade out entirely, and it's also throwing out the idea of these quote-unquote quote unenumerated rights, which the right to privacy, Alito, who's the justice who wrote the opinion, says the right to privacy is an unenumerated right. It's not mentioned in the Constitution. And so if you look at all these other cases, so Griswold v. Connecticut is one, Loving v. Virginia, which is the Supreme Court case overturning state bans on interracial marriage, and I could keep on going, and later on in this cast we'll go to some of the other things, but all of those cases were founded on this same logic. So if he's throwing that logic out for abortion, then it's a really natural consequence for a state to want to ban contraception. They could just say, hey, you already threw it out for one thing, like follow your own precedent and throw it out for this too.
Well, exactly, and that's where they're basically, when I was talking about the penumbras, that's talking about the remind me the phrase you just used, unenumerated.
Unenumerated rights. That means
unnamed
rights.
That non-explicit, not explicitly stated in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And Griswold, along with Einstadt and Roe versus Wade.
Well, there's also Loving v. Virginia. I've heard Brown versus Board of Education, so like segregation in schools, but also Lawrence v. Texas, Obergefell versus Hodges. Lawrence v. Texas.
Let's get back into the specifics of this stuff in a little bit, because I want to fast forward to Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
1992.
Yeah, you're familiar with this one. So this is much more recent. This is within our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You want to share with me basically exactly how that kind of adds on to Griswold, Roe, Einstadt.
So Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992. Supreme Court still upholds Roe, but it adds one more standard, and this is the one that has kind of plagued the system ever since, and that's what's called the undue burden standard, which is that states can restrict or regulate abortion further so long as that they don't provide an undue burden on the woman seeking an abortion. So before, the states couldn't do that. Now, the states can pass more restrictions even in the first trimester when they're supposed to be unrestricted, but it can't be an undue burden. So that's where you get laws requiring waiting periods or like the transvaginal ultrasounds, and forcing women to look at an ultrasound of their pregnancy. And the Supreme Court's held that those are not undue burdens. But like the surgery rights or the admitting rights in a hospital, that's one that's been kind of been fought back and forth, and some courts have said yes, it's an undue burden, others haven't. But yeah, the Planned Parenthood versus Casey allowed for more restrictions and opened the door to all these test cases that states have passed trying to restrict things further and further.
So right now, as things stand, Roe versus Wade says abortions are legal because it's covered under the right to privacy. And that right to privacy is within the penumbrums of the amendments. So you don't have an explicit right to privacy. The phrase right to privacy is not in the Constitution anywhere. Yet it's covered by the amendments. And then you have Planned Parenthood versus Casey and the states. So the states can then regulate abortion, but they can't put undue burden. So they can't make it nearly impossible for some people. And it can't be discriminatory towards protected classes, that it might be more difficult for one race or one religion to get an abortion at all. So we have different states that have different requirements to get an abortion. So you were just talking about some of them, whereas women have to wait a specific amount of time before they can get an abortion.
In some states.
In some states, they have to look at the ultrasound. What was the other one that you mentioned?
Requiring abortion doctors to have admitting privileges at a local hospital.
So what?
There's also some like where some ways that states attacked abortion clinics would be by mandating building codes for abortion clinics, where they would have to have hallways that were like as wide as hospital hallways, like maybe 10 feet instead of the normal 6 or 7. Like there are all these kind of things that, like, if you're in a hospital, makes sense, but an abortion clinic isn't a hospital. So, but they would try and make these rules that seemed kind of fair on the face, but were specifically targeted to shut down the state's abortion clinics. And then you've also got all these trigger laws, which basically say, hey, if Roe v. Wade will fall, like, we're just going to ban it entirely. And that's what you're seeing in Louisiana and Texas right now, among other states, but those are the two that are like on the top of my head.
So how does Texas get away with banning it entirely under Roe versus Wade?
No, it's if Roe versus Wade is overturned, then this law takes effect.
Okay, but I thought. Wait,
are you talking about how
Texas?
Well, are you talking about what happened in September with the 6-week ban and the private enforcement vigilantism?
Yeah, so basically Texas said anybody
so
over
first they
6
set the
weeks,
limit to 6 weeks. It used to be 23 weeks.
Under what, though? In Texas?
Under Roe v. Wade.
Okay. And
in the first 23 weeks, you could get an abortion.
Okay, so the first, what's that, 2 trimesters?
Yeah. So if you want to go with...
And you just gave those exceptions. You just gave the exceptions. First trimester, there's no regulation. Second trimester, to protect the mother's health and safety. Third trimester, it's not specifically banned, but states can have rights with exception to life and the health of the woman.
Yeah. So,
but then that line, health of a woman, is a tricky phrase because it may not necessarily mean her physical health. It could be interpreted as her mental health or familiar health, like the health of her actual family. So that's a tricky phrase. So Texas said, we're going to dial this in.
Not just dial this in. We're going to dial this back to 6 weeks. And so what's important to note about 6 weeks is, one, most women don't know that they're pregnant until 5 or 6 weeks in. Like, even if you're peeing on a stick every day,
exactly,
like you still might not even get like a positive pregnancy test until week 5 or 6.
Yeah,
and
Texas
they make no exceptions after week 6. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. The answer is no, you cannot have an abortion. And they made it that private citizens can sue anyone that knowingly aided or abetted an abortion after 6 weeks. So that means that any doctor could get sued for $10,000. But it also meant that, like, if you called an Uber and went to an abortion clinic, And like the Uber driver obviously is going to know that you're going to an abortion clinic. Like in theory, that Uber driver aided and abetted your abortion.
Exactly. So they didn't make it. They didn't ban abortions entirely, but limiting it to 6 weeks is a window where most people don't know they're going to have an abortion, and then they basically turned its citizens on each other to enforce it,
Yeah.
which is really, in my opinion, really crazy. The fact that they're letting citizens now police that. I don't think any governments let, like, is citizens arrest a real thing?
Yeah, in extremely narrow circumstances.
Okay. All right. So maybe next we could discuss some arguments that people have for being pro-life,
Well,
because
the
I think that
main
would be
argument, I think that there's a difference between acknowledging like that there should be restrictions placed on it, um, where like you say, hey, after the first trimester you shouldn't be doing it, or after the second trimester you shouldn't be doing it. Like I think there's a difference between those people and the people that say under no circumstances. And for the people that say under no circumstances, their stated reason is life begins at conception and you are killing a baby.
and that is rooted in what they're them
Evangelical
believing. Well, I think
evangelical fundamentalist religion.
there would be two reasons. One, they just fundamentally believe that murder needs to be illegal, and that is murder. Or two, they believe that it's murder, and that's rooted in religion. Because you could have somebody who's not religious believe that it's still murder, and then murder is wrong. And that's at the
Well,
point of conception.
I'm not religious, but I'm against murder. But I don't think my personal view is that it's not a person.
So, and that's also where it gets interesting, because this 6 weeks mark, is that where you can first detect a heartbeat? Is that why they said 6 weeks?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And it used to be at was there one? I think at one point they were going to call it at some type of brain function, but
Yeah, there was another one where like maybe at like 12 or 13 weeks where like they claim that the fetus had the ability to feel pain, which I'm going to call bullshit on, but
yeah, and then so yeah, but that would be some type of brain function, and really that what most people consider is at viability, where the fetus is viable, where the fetus can survive outside of the womb.
yeah.
And to me, that to be considered life, you have to be able to live, right? That would
Yeah, to me that
that
like viability of like can it survive outside the mother? Okay, then it's a person.
yeah, I think that's a that would be a sensible line to draw, because a
Well, and that's pretty
heartbeat.
much what Roe v. Wade did.
Yeah, and that's because that's about the 6 month mark, right?
Well, yeah, that was their original basis was saying like when the fetus is viable, it's no longer allowed, and then they had to put some numbers to it.
And I think a fetus becomes viable at the development of lungs, so it can actually breathe outside of the body, because
Well, that would make sense.
it needs oxygen. So it has a heart, it has brain function, and it can breathe. Okay, so let's see. Where should we hit
Well, I
next?
want to let's stick on the religion for a second because now I
Okay.
can introduce my research because a lot of people think like, okay, if you're religious, you're against abortion, but it's really just a small segment.
So wait,
Because,
so you're saying that not all religions, James, are against abortion?
well,
Is that what
thank
you're
you for
saying?
leading me to it. Yeah, so um, Judaism and Islam both allow for abortions. It's not as permissive as Roe v. Wade is, but um, for Islam and Judaism, they both allow for abortions in what's effectively the first trimester, and both of them use the same kind of not viability, but when does it become a person? And for Judaism, and this is coming straight out of the name of the paper is Abortion, the Jewish View, written by Rabbi David Feldman in 1983. And the definition of a person is in the Jewish system, human life in this sense begins with birth. I don't think you can be more clear. Now, in the rest of the paper, he goes on to explain reasons why it's not permissible in certain circumstances and timing issues and stuff, but it's not expressly forbidden as it is in Christianity, where in fundamentalist Christianity, where from day 0 or day 1 you're not allowed to. So Judaism permits it, especially to save the mother's life, because you have one life that is demonstrable and the other that is not until birth. So you take the life that you have, not the life that could be.
Have you heard of the term fetal personhood?
Yeah, Louisiana's trying to do something with that right now.
So that's basically when the fetus can be considered a person. But it's my understanding that is there's only fetal personhood when the fetus is viable outside the womb.
Yeah. So in Islam, when there is a threat to the woman's life because of the pregnancy, Muslims universally agree that the mother's life takes precedence over the life of the fetus, because the woman is considered the original source of the life, while the fetus is only potential life. And in the first 40 days of pregnancy, it's allowed by pretty much all sects of Islam, and then once you get past 120 days, it's basically universally banned. And then between 40 and 120 days, it depends on the sect. But the important thing is that, like, other religions do not have this universal prohibition that you see coming from the fundamental religious right.
Well, it's just when you start backing up the line where that fetus has personhood, right, where it has some type of it is some type of entity, right? Like it's being protected. What is it that's being protected? So what happens is we bring that line back, right? You bring it back away from viability. You bring it to the ability to feel pain or some type of mental function. Then you back it up to some type of heartbeat. Then you back it up to what? When the sperm hits the egg.
Yeah, when you have a fertilized egg.
And then you can but that argument still would become, well, then what about the potential for sperm, and what about the potential for eggs, and then using any type of contraception, even condoms, is eliminating the possibility of the sacred right. So it's a weird slippery slope to argue, which is why if the government has to make that call, I think viability, where it would be an entity that can survive on its own, obviously with lots of help from the hospital, I think that would be a rational line to draw for a government to make that decision. Now, right, individual religions can make their own decision.
Right, and so I think that's why, like, people get lost in this one, in that, like, your personal views are not necessarily a good foundation for public policy. Like, and the idea is, and I'm going to compare this to gay marriage. If you're pregnant and you're against abortion, don't have an abortion. If you're straight and you're against gay marriage, great. Don't marry another dude or another woman. Like,
but
if you're female, it's like
people have their own rights. Yeah.
Yeah, but don't prevent other people from doing something just because you're opposed to it. Like, no one's forcing you to do something that you are against.
Well, if they make abortions illegal, women are going to have only 3 options.
Well, and that's the counterpoint, which is that by making abortion illegal, you are depriving women of life and liberty without due process of law.
Well, you're forcing them to give birth, and the argument would be, but they could give up the baby after that.
Oh, yeah, you want to get to this then?
Well, let me just hit the other 2, and then we can get to that. So women basically have 3 options. They can have the baby, they can give birth, they can travel somewhere to get an abortion, or they can order the abortion pill on the internet.
Yeah, which some states are going to make illegal.
And yeah, but yeah, it would be illegal in that state, and of course, buying it on the internet would be illegal. And then just ordering drugs on the internet in general is like a shady business.
Well, to that point, there are a couple nonprofits that are out there to assist women in these situations. Some of which you can go to the nonprofit and they'll ship you the pills. Others, the nonprofit have funds that will assist with like travel and hardship costs for women that have to go out of state. So there are some people out there organizing to help combat this, but it's still something that, in my view, those charities shouldn't have to exist.
Not in this covert, like kind of dark, shady, dark web type space. And that's
these
where they're forced.
These charities are above board. Like, you can find them, you can Google them. I think one of them's called the Lilith Fund.
Yeah, but you're supposed to be accessing them like secretly. So a government could say to their internet provider, like, you have to ban these websites, right? And then you're using a VPN or something. It just gets that's why I'm saying, like, this dark web, like, you're pushing people to really feel like criminals and really feel like they're breaking the law, and that's where I think that gets a little funny.
You could have some of these charities that are that are actually illegal within certain states.
Yeah. So being forced to give birth. So one of the articles that I read had the phrase, and I didn't know too much about it. I was going to ask you about this, but there was a footnote in the opinion that Judge Alito wrote, and it said something about the domestic supply of infants.
Yup.
And I thought, I didn't read the full statement. So
I've read that there's 2 or 3 footnotes that are all kind of related. One of which has the line "domestic supply of infants," and it's related to a remark that Justice Barrett made during oral arguments about how now versus 50 years ago, one key difference is that most states have like safe haven laws where you can give up, like, if you have your baby, you can either just like leave it at a hospital,
fire department or something.
That you can give up your baby without legal repercussions, and that
or drop it on somebody's doorstep, ring the doorbell, and run away.
Yeah,
like Benjamin Button.
But and so her argument was that carrying a pregnancy is less harmful today than it was 50 or 60 years ago, because you have ways of being able to give it up for adoption or give it to the government, and and it's really that reference of domestic supply of infants was a CDC study saying that, like, the number of babies available for adoption was low, and to me,
domestic babies available for adoption.
Yes, domestic babies available for adoption is low, and if you don't really have to think too hard about why that's a terrifying statement, that like we need to force women to carry pregnancies to term because there's couples in the United States that want to adopt American babies and, like, soft parentheses, white babies, and there aren't enough white babies to adopt.
I wouldn't say necessarily that we're looking to increase the supply of white babies. Because
if you read the entire article, then you would have seen that, like, when it comes to adopting babies, adoption agencies charge more for white babies than black babies.
Yeah. Okay. So I could see how there would be like some supply. I hate to phrase it this way, but some supply and demand influence over pricing. But I would also think that you would have more minority babies because those are the groups that tend to get the most abortions.
Well,
I don't know.
Am
I accurate with that data? Because I feel like I heard that.
Don't know. I want to read this comment real quick. Turtle of 38 says there's so many sides to talk about on this one, and I could agree with so many. It would be nice to make it a private act and thought without government, with a private act and without governances on either sides. So, like, I don't see. Yeah, I would agree. Like, why does government need to be involved in this when it should really just be between a woman and her doctor?
Well, that's the whole issue with the government repealing this, is that now the states can make it illegal across the board,
which some of them are going to.
Yeah, and that's why putting in the state hands, the states aren't equipped to deal with this issue. because they just ban it. But I just want to go back and defend my statement because I feel like that could be misconstrued as a racist statement. It's my understanding that minorities are the ones that have the lesser access to the medical care for pregnancies and for abortion services. Is that a safe statement? Did you
think
come
so.
across that in
I
some of
think
your
that there's
research?
data that, well, you can just look at, like, so socioeconomically, like, the data is really clear that if that minorities are more likely to be, like, economically stressed, and if you don't have as much money, then you're less likely to have access to abortion in a state where the restrictions are high. So in terms of, like, birth rates by race, I don't have that data. But what I can tell you is that if you had read the article about domestic supply of infants, it was really pretty clear that, like, when it comes to domestic supply of infants, that's parentheses white infants, because there's still a supply of black babies according to this article. So it's
But it would be increasing the supply of domestic infants, which is
which going back to the Handmaid's Tale.
yeah.
But even what I think Barrett's argument completely misses, and this is super important, and I linked another article about this, is even if you can have the baby and give it up immediately for adoption to the government with no consequences, having a pregnancy carries risk. It takes a physical and mental toll on you, and there are all sorts of potential consequences or complications of a pregnancy that you have to go through that you can avoid by having an abortion. And statistically, abortion is safer than carrying a pregnancy to term.
That is true. I read that, but I think what needs to be underlined in what you just said is the vast amount of risk involved to the woman in giving birth.
Like, obviously medical science is better now than it was 300 years ago, but what was the number one cause of death of women 300 years ago?
Childbirth.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of that had to do with, like, sanitation.
Yeah, I'd say, like, the number two was probably, like, witch burnings, but...
So can we just talk real quick about stare decisis?
Yeah, it's not getting a lot of respect right now, but...
So stare decisis is the doctrine that courts will adhere to a precedent in making their decisions. So when a court faces a legal argument, if the court previously ruled on the same or something closely related, the court will make a decision in alignment with that previous decision. So
yeah, it's a cornerstone of our legal system.
So stare decisis, basically repealing Roe versus Wade, effectively repeals several other cases as well that Roe versus Wade was based on,
well,
and
it completely ignores stare decisis. It completely ignores precedent. And really, if a court's going to ignore precedent, it has to do so for a very good reason. Like, an example would be Brown versus Board of Education, overruling something like Plessy versus Ferguson, which allowed that, like, separate could be equal, that you could have states that would say, like, blacks only or white only. Like, Brown versus Board of Education also ignored stare decisis, but for very good reason, in acknowledging that separate is not equal.
So I just poured myself a little heavier of a glass right now because this is in the face of stare decisis. Now, I think they were looking at that separate but equal and straightening it out and saying, well, the separate part of it was wrong, right? The equal part of it was right, and we now see things a little more clearly. However, this says what Alito says is that Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. So it's basically entirely outstandingly wrong. And
he's equating Roe v. Wade in the same line as, like, the Dred Scott decision or Plessy versus Ferguson in terms of how wrong it was.
But implying that the Supreme Court has made an egregious error, my thinking is that his statement in itself basically is compromising his integrity.
I would agree.
Because he's saying that the Supreme Court has made a huge error, which then goes to imply that the Supreme Court is capable of making these errors, and it basically says that we can tear down any statement, any decision the Supreme Court has made.
Well, I mean, that's always been the case where the Supreme Court can overrule itself at any point.
But saying that there was an egregious error made, not saying this needs to be straightened out. Maybe we didn't foresee all the consequences of making this decision. What they said was this was a total error, and even though it's been in place for 50 years, it was completely wrong.
Well, yeah, and that's a problem because there have been so many cases that have been decided using similar logic. So, I want to just go through some of the rights that exist today that could be struck down using the same logic of this draft decision. So, we already talked about interracial marriage, Loving v. Virginia. We already talked about access to contraception.
So hold on, let's Loving versus Virginia. That is based on the premise of privacy,
equal protection under law too.
Okay, but the privacy to someone's personal affairs, their marriage, basically.
Yeah, but also equal protection under law of why are we letting only white people marry? That means that a white person and a black person are not treated equally.
Okay.
So we already talked about Griswold versus Connecticut, and the Erstat one, which just said unmarried people too. But we also have Lawrence v. Texas was a 2003 case where Texas had state sodomy laws. And it made it so having homosexual sex was criminal, and it didn't matter if you were consenting and you were in your own house with the doors shut and the shutters closed, criminal.
Yeah, it made gay sex completely illegal.
Yeah, so Lawrence v. Texas was overruled struck down state sodomy laws on the same logic. Obergefell versus Hodges, which is the decision allowing for nationwide gay marriage to take place, that one is also based on the right to privacy and equal protection. So we could very easily see gay marriage getting struck down at the state level. We could see gay sex being criminalized. We could see IVF and contraception being banned at state levels.
Hold on, wait. I want to talk about the IVF 1 second. But okay, so you missed interracial marriage, and then so why is IVF? How does that? How exactly is that illegal? How would that be made illegal? I'm curious. That was the one that didn't connect in my head.
Louisiana is looking to do that.
And
now, if you were to ask me the justification for it, I don't actually know.
Okay, yeah, that was one that didn't quite make sense.
I don't know why they would want to, but it's on the books.
Maybe because it's not natural.
Not on the books yet. It's a proposed law.
Okay.
And Rosh says, "What if sodomy is performed between a man and a woman?" Yeah, also criminal, actually.
Also criminal. Yeah, very very strange. All right, what else? You had a few more you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. So interracial marriage, access to contraception, access to IVF, access protection from state sodomy laws, and ability to have gay marriage. And also another thing that's important is if you have abortion as criminal, then if you try and induce abortion on yourself, the old coat hanger method, that's illegal. So now every miscarriage could possibly be a criminal act. Yeah, and so even if any risky behavior that you take while pregnant, let's say you're pregnant and you ride a motorcycle, is that endangering the life of the fetus?
Yeah, really, really. Oh, God.
What if you're smoking? What if you're drinking? What if you smoke pot?
Yeah. But also, yeah, the miscarriage, then there would be so much speculation over a miscarriage. That is crazy. So let's see.
And the thing is, this is always going to end up disproportionately affecting the society's least privileged. Because if you are rich and you live in the state of Texas, and Texas bans abortion entirely, and you want to have an abortion, It's going to be an inconvenience for you because you're going to have to fly out of state. But you can afford to take a week off of work. You can afford the flight. You can afford the doctor's care.
And
Whereas
yeah,
if
and
you're poor, you can't.
exactly. And also, no one's going to know. You could be 2 months in, you could be maybe even 3 months in, nobody senses anything, and then you just go on vacation to California or New York, and you could afford that. However, also if you don't have much money, you have to take the risky behavior of connecting with the people around you who may not have the same values to try to get money from them.
Hmm.
So look, you sent me this one Slate.com article, and I think it was written by Dahlia Lithwick.
Hmm.
And I'm going to read a statement from her. She said, I think so much of the norm of care and solicitude about the justices who came before is gone. Respect for the people who crafted Planned Parenthood versus Casey that was deeply ingrained, such that you don't just write an opinion saying, man, Roe was a shoddy piece of drafting. Man, Casey was capitulative, and that was predicated on nothing. So what she's saying basically is you don't write an opinion just calling other other opinions shit.
Yeah, there's a fundamental disrespect
And
that's
and
being paid in his draft opinion.
and that's one of the things that particularly bothers me about this. Now, bear in mind, this was leaked. It was unlikely the public was ever going to see this, and maybe it would have been toned down
It's
by
doubtful because, like, if you look at the document, so the formatting of the document, it looks just like what a real opinion would be.
yeah, but it didn't necessarily. We don't know what would have happened to it, so it is a bit unfair to speculate on. I did hear that the Roe opinion was also leaked.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, and that also when the decision came out, I think one of the presidents died that day. It might have been like Lyndon Johnson or something like that. So the front page of the news was not about Roe versus Wade. It was more so about the president. So it didn't have as much of a blockbuster big splash that that's kind of what's happening right now. And also, news didn't circulate as fast. But you turn on any device right now, whether it's an iPad, a TV, a radio, they're talking about this right now. And here's my opinion, because we're rounding out the podcast here. Here's my opinion on where we stand with Roe versus Wade and repealing it. That they're not ruling this based on whether or not they think abortion is good or bad. They're not taking that angle. What they're saying is that the decision to ban abortion in the past wasn't a good decision.
I
Basically,
mean, the decision to permit abortion in the past.
yeah. I'm sorry. So permitting abortion through Roe versus Wade was based on nuances and penumbras of the Constitution and the amendments, and that it should never have been explicitly allowed.
So I don't think your conclusion's correct because there's other parts in the draft opinion where he specifically talks about like the wickedness of abortionists.
But I think that would be the better conversation to have, and I think that maybe there would be some chance that abortion moving forward, that there might be some amount of pro-choice because that is a right, the right to choose in some some type of pursuit of freedom of choice or something along those lines, and that banning abortion on the basis of murder doesn't count if it's before viability.
Well, and ultimately what the Supreme Court decision is going to do is kick it back to each individual state to regulate as it pleases. So
Yeah.
some states there's going to be functionally no change. Connecticut, California, New York. Your life's not going to be all that different. Texas, North Carolina, Florida, Louisiana,
Many
South Carolina.
states. Yeah, a whole bunch of
Like
states.
probably
Yeah.
about 28 states or whatever. Your life might change considerably if this is an issue that ever comes up in your life.
Yeah, I'm curious what percentage of women have an abortion over a lifetime, but I think it's a not
It's
a
not
small
small.
number. Yeah. Can you
Uh,
search that real quick?
yeah,
Because I'm really
the
curious
research
what
department
that.
on it.
Now, you and I aren't the founding fathers, but I think us having a conversation where we're trying to critically think and absorb the information is the conversation that the Supreme Court justices really need to be having, and not this rooted in religious.
23.7% by age 45.
So roughly a quarter of women, so between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 women have had an abortion by the age of 45. That's a lot of women. Um,
Yep. Rosh is giving you the same
right,
numbers.
yeah. So Rush has the same
Um,
number.
well, I think even referencing the founding fathers, like when the founding fathers were writing the Constitution, you know how many rights women had?
None. They used the
That
word men across the board.
Yeah, women were like you couldn't hold land as a woman, like you couldn't vote. Women had no rights whatsoever. So women were basically not even citizens. So saying that what the and actually, if you want to go with the founding fathers thing, like you can look. Ben Franklin in a textbook actually gives advice on how to induce an abortion, saying like, yeah, this like might be needed. So even with zero rights, like at least one of the founding fathers wasn't opposed to it. But I would say the founding fathers' opinion on anything women's rights related, you can just throw that right in the trash.
I mean, this feels very dystopian. It,
Hmm.
it, it. But again, what I'm saying, I feel like the laws are infringing on the rights both ways. I'm talking about the ordered lockdowns that came from that you're saying no because you're inclined to because of your liberal background, but the first place that shut down was China. No one, we've never shut down like that before. We got that from communist China. Okay, lockdowns, not a normal thing to ever have happened.
No, they happened. They've happened before.
Give me an example.
The
Nationwide
Spanish
lockdown.
flu in like 1918.
Uh, I don't necessarily know that people weren't just more inclined to stay at home on their own for fear of getting sick,
But
and and people were dying at a greater rate than they were with the coronavirus. But we took that. The media basically ordered us to do that, and we did it. And then you have eviction moratorium, where you have people who own property supporting other people out of their pocket. It's the eviction moratorium just meant that somebody had to go 20 months earning zero income.
so I don't
Yeah.
understand what the
My,
connection
my point is
between
just
these
is I feel like
these
the
are.
rights on both sides are coming in. So you feel like the rights that we're talking about right now when it comes to abortion are being intruded on by the right. I'm saying I think we're they're closing in on us from every direction. And that's back to my beach rules sign. The sign just keeps getting bigger. Before long, they're going to be dictating how much space between your beach towels on the beach, whether you can lie in one direction or the other direction on the beach, whether you have to wear sunscreen on the beach, because they all make sense. They're all logical. They're all logical rules, but that sign just never gets smaller, and that's where I feel like we're really encroaching on the freedom. I know you don't necessarily agree with me on this one, but
No, I don't.
I I feel that from deep down inside that it's not it's very dystopian feeling to me. Um, what else? What else are we missing here?
And we
That
kind
we
of
should.
touched on all
That,
the major issues. I guess the question is twofold. One, is there going to be a shift in the final opinion that the Supreme Court actually issues in about 4 to 6 weeks? Is the draft opinion representative of what the final decision is going to be, or will one of the justices that sided with Alito, will one of them switch over to Roberts and the liberal justices and come with a more measured response, which we'll fully expect to see tailbacks in terms of what's allowed, but not a complete reversal of Roe? And then the second question is for people that value women's ability to make these choices for themselves, where do you go from here to help improve the situation? What are the things that can be done? Because it's pretty bleak right now.
So I want to round out this. I want to talk a few more minutes on some of the things that can be done, because I think that that's actually a good conversation to have. We're going to drop the Instagram live stream in about 30 seconds. So if you're watching on Instagram, you can always join us on TikTok, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, or YouTube. So let's drop our Instagram live. And I want to talk right now. Adios, Instagram. I want to just finish with what could be done, because there's our
Yeah,
exit
first
music.
we have to operate under the assumption that even if the exact language in the draft opinion isn't the final opinion, that the substantive conclusion is the same.
Yeah, I think the language may not be the same, but it sounds to me, and they've been saying this for decades, that Roe versus Wade is going to be repealed. And there's been, and that's, it's been kind of like this slow, like simmer. It hasn't come to a boil until now. Now it's really at a boil because we have Trump, who really turned up the heat on this with the Supreme Court nominations and the justices that have been put in place. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's some fundamental bullshit here with somebody who lost the popular vote by like 3 million people getting to appoint 1/3 of the court in 4 years.
and also, this is a decision that the opposite, so 2/3 of the population, think should stay in place. I'm curious the Catholic Church's opinion on condoms, and then I'm also curious. I'm very curious the Catholic Church's opinion. I wonder what the Pope is thinking right now, and if that would have any impact on.
Well, he's probably asleep.
Well, he is probably asleep. I think, what's that, 6 hour difference maybe
6
to Italy?
or 7.
Yeah,
Probably 6.
but I'm very curious if the Catholic Church had something they interjected into this conversation.
Well, in terms of where do we go from here while you're doing that research, I think one thing that's important to note is that for the sector of the right wing that had this as an important issue, they fought fervently for this for decades and kind of never lost focus of it. And I think the left, as they are often prone to do, got complacent.
Yeah, well, that happens often with the left. That's almost
And
a
I
characteristic.
actually saw a
of it.
really interesting take as to why is it that conservatives so often find agreement and there is so much discord in the left in terms of what to do as a society and policy proposals. And the answer I got that I saw was really good, which was there's only one way to stay the same. There are infinite ways to change.
Expand on that.
So if you boil liberal versus conservative values to
Okay.
their very core, it's conservatives want to keep things the same and liberals want to change things. There's only one way to stay the same. There's infinite ways to change.
Okay. To clear up the condom situation, so the church said that it is the acceptable lesser of evils where there is a risk of HIV or AIDS contamination.
When was that changed? That has to have been recent.
2000, November 23rd. Oh, that says 2010. So that was November 2010.
Way to get with the times.
Yeah, interesting. But I knew it wasn't too long ago. I thought maybe the last 5 to 10 years, but it looks like it was
close
12
enough.
years. So my thinking is that their argument against Roe versus Wade, the way that they made the argument, saying that Roe versus Wade was egregious error and just really insulting the Supreme Court, which they are.
Oh, let me give you. So Kevin is commenting, and he knows a lot about the Catholic Church. He says The current Catholic Church stance is that they're against all abortion unless the health of the mother is at risk. However, the current Pope has taken a less militant approach compared to Benedict XVI and John Paul II. So the current Catholic Church is actually more permissible to abortion than some of these states because they're at least allowing it in the cases where it might kill the mother.
Wow. Okay.
Where it's to avoid killing the mother,
Yeah.
not that abortion will kill the mother.
But what I'm saying is that the fact that the Supreme Court basically is tearing at itself, which I think is really bad. I think abortion needs to be argued a different way, and I think that there needs to be rights to protect. I think the woman's right to choose needs to be somewhere in the constitutional amendments, basically.
You know what the chances of that happening are?
Well, at this point, slim to none, if not less. But that's I think it needs to come down to an argument about murder, and what
That's
ending.
a false equivalency, though.
But that's where the pro-choice argument wins, right?
Yeah, because one's a person, one's not.
But I think if you meet anybody on the street and you talk to them about abortions and they say they're against abortion, they're not going to say because it doesn't violate someone's right to privacy. I think they're going to say because it's murder.
Yeah.
And that's not the conversation that the Supreme Court is having right now. They're having a conversation about rights of privacies and penumbras.
They're justifying their decision that way. There's a difference between basing a decision on something and justifying a decision with something.
Yeah, the decision, not the decision. The opinion was like 83 pages or 63 pages.
98.
It was an insane amount of a very, very long decision, and arguably poorly written. Just I don't know. It's very frustrating to see something like this happen. I can't think of any similarities. Can you think of anything that would be similar that's happened? Maybe under Trump, something like this?
Maybe.
So Rash brought up a good point. What if a woman has many abortions because of her careless lifestyle? She just knows she can get rid of any baby without having to make any adjustments to her lifestyle.
That doesn't really happen.
Well, it does.
No, it really doesn't.
I'm positive it does because I know of people who have had multiple abortions who just sleep around and just get the contraceptive pill. You're basically running around at 2:00 in the morning.
You're talking about the Plan B?
Plan B, or getting an actual abortion, the abortion pill. So, I wonder if Plan B would be made illegal in these states like Texas.
Yep.
Wow, really?
Yep.
Yeah, so that they're basically equating Plan B with the abortion pill.
Well, think about it. So what Plan B does is you've got a fertilized egg cell in the fallopian tubes.
Yep.
So Plan B prevents the egg from implanting in the wall of the uterus. So if you have a fertilized egg, well, that's now a person.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
But
because it hasn't grown into a human yet at this point.
But life begins at conception. Therefore,
have an egg.
Therefore, Plan B is preventing that person from living. Therefore, murder. I mean, I don't agree with the argument, but you can understand it.
Yeah, I don't see much way around repealing Roe versus Wade. Like, I can't think of a compelling reason for them not to, based off this opinion. right? And that's what's really frustrating me right now.
Well, Rosh is saying it's not a person according to Judaism. I'm like, yeah, of course, but like, what if you've got a
But
state that
according to the
passes a
people making
personhood
the
law?
arguments, yeah.
Yeah, like if life begins at conception, then that egg that's 20 cells big in the fallopian tube is a person. And if you take a pill that prevents that egg from implanting in the uterus, then you have just killed a person.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, but that's the conclusion.
I had some weird thoughts on my commute home today about how the Supreme Court basically giving a boatload of rights back to the states, all of the rights that we talked about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
is, I mean, I feel like it's just going to bring us back like 100 fucking years.
Oh, it totally will. Think about
And-
this. So imagine a state passes a law that bans interracial marriage. Like it sounds far fetched, but let's imagine that, like, let's say you're married to a black woman and you go on vacation to a state where interracial marriage is not recognized. And let's say something happens and she's in the hospital. So you want to go to the hospital to check on her, but since you are not married to her because the state doesn't recognize your marriage, you have no visitation rights.
Yeah. But what it made me think of was that the United States is going to end up so super divided.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the job of the federal, that's just Supreme Court shouldn't be creating divisiveness across the states. The Supreme Court was actually put in place to do the exact opposite.
To settle disputes between states.
Exactly. So that,
That's one of its main roles.
yeah. All right, dude. I don't know much. I just can't see a way out of this, which is very frustrating for me. And I got nothing else.
Well, I'm going to bring you back to the conversation we had on election night 2020.
Okay, what was that?
How does building a compound somewhere in a Caribbean nation sound?
It sounds like a really, really good idea. This country is not.
Costa Rica is also appealing.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't feel
Dave
like
Chappelle doesn't live in Utah. Dave Chappelle lives in Ohio.
both four-letter states, but it just feels like we're moving so fucking backwards. It's so weird. Yeah. But look, on that note, I'm going to end the podcast. I got nothing else to say, and I really feel stumped, and I don't like ending on a stumped feeling, but I don't see any movement forward. So I'm going to thank you for your time this evening, James. Going to thank Rosh Galeb for his time feeding us your comments on Facebook and Instagram and the other live websites. Make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and all audio podcast platforms. Thank you guys for joining. James, anything you want to add on the way out of here?
I don't know. Vote out these people that are restricting freedoms.
Well, this is what happens when you vote someone into office who is so extreme with their rhetoric. Is they end up, stacking the Supreme Court, which is wild. Yep. Because these guys are they're not voted in. Supreme Court is not voted in, and they're in there for a lifetime. So we could be looking at 40 more years of some of these guys, which is also fucking wild. All right. On that note, I need another drink, but adios.
All right, laters.
This is the other end. This is the end. Thank you for making it this far into the podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast. Share the podcast with anybody you think might be interested, especially when the topics are in line with their interests are. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.